Good morning. This is Tom Stevens from the Union County Daily Digital. Over the course of the last week, we've had occasion to speak with each of the four candidates for Marysville City Council First Ward. That'd be Joshua Bokar, Scott Brock, Aaron Carpenter, and Scott Zwizinski. All their responses have been videotaped and are available here on our website at unioncountydailydigital.com. We do this in hopes that you'll be better informed when you go to the ballot box on November 5th. Thank you. Good morning. I'm Tom Stevens with the Union County Daily Digital, and today we're here with Mr. Scott Brock, who is the incumbent for the first ward seat in the Marysville City Council, and he is running on the November 5 ballot. Thank you for being with us this morning.
Thank you, Tom. Glad to do it.
We'll jump right into it, and we'll just get right to the questions. The first one is, do you feel our zoning code book is too long right now as it stands?
Good question. Tom, I worked for the City of Dublin for 8 years, from 2000 to 2008. And much of that time when I was doing GIS and IT stuff, we were actually in the planning department. So I sat through, and this was, 2000 to 2008 was when Dublin was booming. I mean, there were subdivisions that was being approved and new subdivisions being platted, certainly every month, sometimes every week. And so I would sit in these planning staff meetings that sometimes would last, they were known across the city. They would sometimes last 4, 5, 6 hours, planning staff meetings, where they were talking about, is 3.5 inches too high for a sign versus 3.75 inches? And this color versus that color, and to the naked eye, you really couldn't tell the difference. So I'm very familiar with zoning codes, sign codes, with land use and how those can be picked apart in a community. I certainly understand that. I think the city is doing a really good job with revamping our zoning code. So it's currently caught up in the Planning Commission now. There's some things that they're looking at, but reducing our zoning districts 20%, I think has been a big benefit, or will be a big benefit to us. That helps us make it more user-friendly, which I think was the goal, so that our residents and our businesses are able to easily understand it, and also so that our staff, it's easier for our staff to consistently enforce it, and that's a big deal. I will tell you that, and specifically to Ward 1, most of Ward 1 is built out. You've got Cooks Point still that is developing, but there's a plan for that. But there are some properties that are south of the Burger King there that I'm taking a close look at in terms of what comes out of this new zoning code to make sure that the land use that's set for that empty land there is what we want there. Several years ago, I went to City Council and I spoke on behalf of the residents in the Northwood subdivision, which I lived in. And at the time, they were looking at rezoning that property and putting a big box in there. And I talked to council about the biggest investment that most people ever make is their homes. And so as leadership, as I was talking to council then, as leadership of the city, you need to be very aware of how you're affecting the values of people's homes when you rezone things. And so now that I have moved, I want to make sure that if new zoning is coming in, particularly in that area, that we're doing it in a way that makes sense for that community, that we're not putting in a big box there that's going to have semi-trucks delivering things all night long, that we're not going to have increased traffic there that the infrastructure can't deal with. So I think the zoning code that we are redoing is a great thing for the city. Again, it's going to help us enforce things more consistently, but in particular, in my ward, I'm very interested in watching that property south of Burger King.
Are there any particular zoning districts or codes that you would cut or modify right now, or are there any like you see on the books right now?
No, there's nothing that I see that needs modified or changed now. What I think is important, though, and this is probably the most important thing about a zoning code, a new zoning code that we put in place doesn't mean that is set in stone, and it never should be. We need to make sure as a city and as a staff that we remain agile with our code, because tomorrow changes everything. We need to make sure that we adapt with what the businesses want. We need to make sure that we're working very closely with businesses, not just new businesses coming in, but existing businesses, and making sure that they understand what our code is and we understand what they're looking for. Oftentimes you have to meet in the middle, and that's okay. But I don't think there's anything currently that I say, nope, we shouldn't have that. I will tell you, if residents drive around municipalities, particularly in Central Ohio, and you drive through a city that you think is aesthetically pleasing, the experience that I have in local government and state government, again, over 20 years, I will tell you that those communities' sign codes and zoning codes are much more strict than the city of Marysville's.
Or is the city of Marysville code book, is it comparable in size to similar cities of the same size, or similar size as Marysville?
You mean,
I mean, do we have a thicker code book than most cities, or do we have a thinner one? Or?
Yeah, I think that I don't think we can get into how many pages are our code. You know, we can increase or decrease the font, and we can increase and decrease the pages. You know, that's not what's important. What's important is the substance in the code. And I can tell you that it's difficult to compare codes to different cities because every city is different. And the code that we have should match the aesthetics that we want in our community. It should match the heritage of our community. It should match the values and the direction where we want our community to go. And that might not be the same for other cities. So I don't think that we could compare. But what I can tell you, though, is if you're driving around Central Ohio and you're driving through a city and you say, this city is really aesthetically pleasing, boy, things look nice, their code is much likely much more stringent than Marysville's.
Okay. And have the current codes hurt or hindered business or helped the business come into the city right now? Has enforcement of those codes, have they hurt or hindered? Or
you know,
helped or hindered, rather?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I've spent a lot of time talking to the administration, to the city manager, to the zoning code folks, to the city engineer, and I've asked them that same question because I've heard some things from residents, never from a business, mind you, but I've heard some things from residents that, well, this business didn't locate here because of the zoning was too strict or because there was a disagreement about a sign. And I've been told that that has never happened here, at least in the last 10, 12 years.
Okay.
That has simply not happened. Now, I will tell you, new businesses coming in seem to get it, right? They seem to understand this is what your code is. We've looked at other communities. We understand that here's what you want from us. Existing businesses, which are just as, if not more important than the new businesses, sometimes there's some give and take that needs to happen as they want to update their building, as they want to change things, and they need to be, the things that they put in place need to be more aligned with our new code. Sometimes that can be a challenge, no doubt about that. But I think the city works really hard. I think staff works really hard to work with those businesses to make sure that we can get folks in compliance if they're changing things on their existing businesses.
Great.
Yeah.
We're going to shift gears completely off the codes now.
Sure.
The city of Marysville uses a lot of incentives to attract businesses. These incentives are like TIF, JEDS, the C to the Enterprise Zone, the CRA.
Yeah.
What are the differences between these programs and how are they helping the city?
Yeah, another really good question. So, as I've said before, with the insurgence of population that Marysville has experienced and will continue to experience, the most important thing our community can do is make sure that our business development, our business growth, is not being far outpaced by our residential growth. That residential growth needs to be paid for, and the only way to pay for that is with economic development. So the things that you've mentioned, there's kind of a couple of different things. We can start with we'll start with a TIF. So a tax increment finance, that's everything that you mentioned is an economic development tool. And a TIF is a tool that the city has historically used for both commercial developments and for residential developments. Generally speaking, most folks want to avoid now using a TIF for residential development. The reason why is the way that TIFs work is you have an undeveloped piece of property. And so a value is assessed on that property and a certain amount of property taxes is assessed on that undeveloped piece of land.
Just like any other piece of land.
Just like any other piece of land. And a TIF creates a fund in which monies go into. So as that piece of land is developed, the value of that land increases. And in such, the property taxes increases as well. So the difference between what the property tax on that land was undeveloped versus what it is while it's developed or after it's developed. The difference in that goes into this TIF fund. Those monies then are used for the infrastructure to develop that piece of property. The challenge with that is most of the property taxes goes to our counties and our schools.
Right.
And so if we are asking the counties and the schools to delay collection of some of those property taxes, then we need to make sure that we're making them whole at some point in the process. And so the relationship that we have with Union County as a city, the relationship we have with Union County, the relationship that we have with Marysville School District is paramount to getting these things done. The Cook property, for instance, is I think 50% TIF, if I'm not mistaken. So what that means is 50% of the value of that property tax as it increases goes to the TIF fund, and 50% goes to the schools and the county. So they're not waiting for a long time. The difference, though, with a commercial TIF and a residential TIF is when we develop a residential development, the services that need to be offered and extended to the residents is great, right? There's everything from police and fire to roadway. On the school side, it's a lot more kids. On the county side, maybe it's senior services. So you are giving them more services, but you're not getting money back. On a residential side or the commercial side, it's a little bit different because you're not offering as many services. You're not paying for as many services for a commercial development. So it's a little bit easier for a county and a school to be able to deal with that. Now, again, they're going to be made whole as that TIF continues to grow. Eventually, they start pulling more and more money, the counties and the school pull more and more money from that TIF fund. A great example is Coleman's Crossing. Coleman's Crossing was a TIF that we set up. And as that developed, that fund has grown tremendously over the last 10, 12 years. So now, as we look at infrastructure improvements on Coleman's Crossing, if we look at widening that road, we don't have to take money from our general revenue fund. We can take money from that TIF, we can put in another lane, or we can do whatever we want with that, with improvements of that infrastructure and pay for it out of that TIF. And considering the property value of the property values within that TIF has continued to grow, more of that money is continuing to go to the schools and the county, so they're being made whole.
How about some of the other ones, so like the JEDS, the Joint Economic Development, and CRA? How are they helping this?
Yeah, so again, all of these are economic development tools, and it's important to just have as many of those tools in our toolbox as possible. The CRA is a community reinvestment, and that's something that we just put into Innovation Park. And what's important about that is it shows that the city is listening to the folks that we're trying to attract here. So our economic development folks came to City Council and said, hey, we've been working with businesses, we've been working with developers, we're trying to market and attract businesses to Innovation Park. And what we're told is if we want to stay competitive with those around us, that we need to make this a CRA. We need to change what we're doing, we need to put in a CRA. That's going to help us attract businesses. CRAs make complete sense. It allows property owners to get a tax abatement on the improvement of that property as things are developed. Again, an economic tool that makes sense, but what's more important is it shows that the city is willing to listen and adapt when we're working with businesses and developers and trying to attract them. Something else that's important, the JED that we just put into place. We have a JED, a Joint Economic Development District. We have a JED with Mill Creek Township, and we just signed an agreement with Jerome Township. So why is a JED important, and what does a JED do? So a JED allows, on the city side, a JED allows the city to expand its income tax base without expanding the footprint of our city. And that's important because if we were to annex more property, all of those properties that we annex, we got to supply services to. We got to put roads out there. Our police has to patrol out there, right? What a JED does is it takes a district, a defined district within a township. We keep that district within a township. We're never going to annex that district as long as this JED is in place. And then we put a income tax on it. So any new business that develops within that JED pays Marysville's income tax. 1.5% income tax. The business and the employees pay 1.5% income tax. Benefit to the county is that they're getting income tax that otherwise they wouldn't, because counties don't collect income
In the
tax.
township too?
I'm sorry, not the county, I'm sorry, the township.
Okay.
The township is collecting income tax that they otherwise wouldn't, and they are assured that that's not going to be annexed, which is a big fear of townships, right? They don't want to be annexed. So some of the money goes into the city, 15% in this case, 15% of that income tax goes to the city, 15% goes to the township, 70% goes to that JED fund. Now that JED fund, similar to a TIF, is funds that can be used not just for infrastructure, but funds that can be used to better develop that district. So it can be infrastructure, it can be roads, it can be taking a property that's in a township that wants to be developed and making it a job-ready site. So we put roads to it, we put our utilities there. The other thing that's important is the city of Marysville, we supply water and utilities to Southern Union County, to Jerome Township. In order to do that, we have to pay to run our water lines there. We have to pay for pump stations. We have to pay for all of the infrastructure. What this does in creating this JED, this puts money into this pot that we're going to be able to use to put the new pump stations out there, because there's more and more users, right? Bigger pipes going in, more users coming on. And so that's how it benefits the city, and it also benefits the township as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
The city council, of course, controls the budget for the city of Marysville.
Yep.
Right now, do you think there's wasteful spending in the city budget?
Wasteful spending? I don't actually. I worked for the city of Marysville for 3.5 years. I've been involved with Marysville on city council, and was involved with Marysville before and after I left. Marysville has always run very lean. I've never seen a Marysville budget that I would say there's some fat there that needs to be cut. There are certainly conversations that happen, there are debates that happen to say, why are we spending money here when we should be spending money here, right? How much are we putting towards roads? Are we putting money towards quality of life? Are we putting money towards staffing? And I think each council member sort of has things that they're a little bit more passionate about, maybe. Certainly, as a ward council member, I want to make sure that our ward is getting its fair share of things funded, right?
Sure.
But also, as a ward council member, I need to make sure that I have a enterprise approach to leadership in the city. It's not just about Ward 1, right? It's a much broader picture. Some of the things that are important to me, though, in the budget is regarding staff. I am the Chief Information Officer for the State of Ohio's Economic Development Department. And I lead a large staff. I led a large staff when I was the CIO for the Ohio Department of Commerce, and I understand the importance of investing in your staff. If we want good decisions to come out of the city of Marysville, and we want good services to be provided by the city of Marysville, then we need to attract, retain, and train good staff at the city of Marysville. I heard it said one time that a CFO asked the CIO about training dollars for their staff and said, what happens if we spend all this money training our staff and they leave? And that CEO looked at him and he said, what happens if we don't spend that money on them on training and they stay? And I think the exact same thing with the organization that I run at the state and with the leader and with the city that I try to lead here. I will always fight for more training dollars for staff. I will do that in this upcoming budget, and if I'm elected, I'll continue to do that. Again, we can't complain about bad decisions made if we're not investing in staff and getting the best staff that we can and getting them trained up the way that we should.
Okay, very nice. Last question. I know
Sure.
That'll make you happy. Do you think it's important that anybody who's running for a city council seat or any kind of seat across the county, is it important that they involve themselves prior to being elected, to attend meetings, to do that, to be involved?
Yeah, absolutely. I commend anybody who wants to be in a leadership position. Running for an elected office isn't an easy feat. There's a lot of time that goes into it. Depending on the type of person you are, there's a lot of uncomfortable moments. Certainly for me, I am a introvert that tries hard at times to play an extrovert, right? So a lot of the things that you have to do in a campaign is difficult for me to do. However, The most important thing that I think is outside of connecting with the residents is being present and being involved. I simply just can't imagine running for a position and not being involved, not going to city council meetings, not going to other meetings. I am on city council, so of course I go to all the city council meetings, but I also go to almost every other meeting that the city has. I go to every single business impact breakfast meeting. Again, these are open to the public that other folks could and maybe should be going to. I go to all of the Northwest 33 Council of Government meetings. I go to all of the Northwest 33 Innovation meetings. All of these things are, if you're wanting a job, all of these things, in my opinion, are things you need to do. You need to be there to hear what's going on. You need to understand the flow of things. And also, I'll point this out: the City Council, you are 1/7 of a vote. Okay, 1/7 doesn't do a whole lot. But building a relationship with your 6 peers is huge. It is so big. We can move mountains together. We really can. But if you sit up here and you've not been involved in anything that's going on, if you've not worked on understanding how council operates and understanding what issues they're trying to face and how they're trying to deliver services for the city, then in my opinion, I think you're just completely lost.
Okay, thank you very much. That's
Thanks,
exactly
Tom.
what I did. Thank you for having us down here today, Mr. Brock.
Very good.
We've been with Scott Brock, who is the incumbent in the 1st Ward of the Marysville City Council, and he's running again on the November 5 ballot. My name is Tom Stevens. I'm with the Union County Daily Digital. Good morning. Good morning. My name is Tom Stevens. I'm with the Union County Daily Digital. We are here this morning with Scott Swizinski, who is running for council on the Marysville City Council in the Ward 1. Good morning, Scott.
Good morning, Tom. Thanks for having me here. Appreciate the opportunity.
Great. We just wanted to ask you a couple questions here, and we'll just get it started off here. Do you feel our zoning code book is too long?
I think it's a little too complicated. I think it could be shortened and simplified, and I know that's something that many people in the city have been working on in the administration. Of course, they've had some barriers, and it was recently tabled in the Planning Commission, but I think it needs to be something that is agreeable with the city and something that's going to keep the city looking nice and putting appropriate businesses and items in appropriate places, but also needs to be user-friendly to continue to develop and continue to bring the growth to Union County and to Marysville. That kind of growth, if you can work together and you can partner with members of the city and different developers and all those players that are involved when a business wants to come here or a development wants to build here, when you bring all those people to the table, you get different perspectives that I think would create a zoning code that would be beneficial to all, with the city obviously taking the charge.
What codes would you cut or modify?
Oh, that's a great question. There's a lot of codes, and unfortunately I couldn't cite specific codes. There's a lot of codes that deal with homes and building fences in relations to setbacks and decks and easements and things like that I think needs to be simplified. There's a lot of city resources and city time. I know that from the time on the Board of Zoning Appeals that I've spent, that we see a lot of those just about every spring of people who are saying, hey, I want to build this fence, but I've got this setback here, and now they have to come in front of us. And it's, simplifying those codes or changing those codes to make them easier for homeowners to improve the quality of their homes or the value of their homes would let the city and Planning Commission, Design Review Board, Board of Zoning Appeals focus on dealing more with developers and people who want to build multifamily unit developments or single-family housing units, and of course businesses and industry want to come here. It frees us up to do that.
Are there any specific codes that we need that we don't have now?
I really don't know. I'd have to go through and look through the 1,000-page code book or whatever. It's sizable. So I couldn't give you a good answer to that without doing some research on it.
Okay, we'll just skip on to the next one. Yeah, it kind of involves the first two. Is the Marysville code book comparable in size and in the scope to cities of similar size?
I believe in some of the scope it is. If you look at some of the surrounding communities, Dublin and Hilliard are ones that always come to the forefront. We're doing a lot of things that are in line with some of those communities, just in terms from an aesthetics purposes, materials used. So much has to be brick. You have to have this kind of base, more monument signs versus the long pole signs. Those are all kinds of things that I think are in line with a lot of the surrounding communities.
Okay. Do you feel we've had a gain or loss of business because of our current code enforcements?
From talking to people who are involved with some businesses and, people, it's always one of those, I know a guy who knows an architect who won't work in the city of Marysville because they feel like they're too difficult to work with. I've never heard specifically any business that has said, I'm not coming here because you guys are too difficult to work with. Good example was for years there were rumors that, Panera and Texas Roadhouse, neither of which wanted to come here, and both of which are now in line to come here. Panera's, it seems like every time I go past there, I think they're close to serving food, it feels like. And of course, with the recent vote at the BZA, of the Texas Roadhouse, they're in line to start building once they go through the design review board process. So I'm sure there are businesses that have said, you know what, I'm going to look elsewhere, something a little easier. I couldn't cite specific examples because none have been presented to me personally.
Okay, great. With today's increased economic development here in the city, the city uses a lot of cities incentives and so on to, such as TIF, JEDS, CRA, enterprise zones. What are the difference between these programs?
Well, they're all very similar, and the purpose is to be competitive with other communities to bring businesses here. You get a TIF that's going to, ensure that some of the property taxes and things like that are going to schools after so many years. A CRA, there was one that was just discussed in front of City Council, that says if you're doing these types of improvements, you only have to pay a certain amount of the property taxes for so many years. And the same thing with businesses. I believe the one that's looking down on the kind of southeastern end, the Industrial Parkway, the CRA there has to deal with, a 10-year 100% tax break, so to speak, or 75%, where they're only paying 75% of the value of the property in the building to the city for this certain times. It's something to help it be competitive. JEDs, I think, are a really great idea. A JED gives you all the benefits without having to pay for any of the services, so to speak.
Yeah.
I mean, that's really what it does. There's development, you're partnering with other communities, you're sharing some of the wealth, but you're also sharing the cost. So it's very beneficial to all parties involved, in my opinion.
Are there any other programs such as these, the TIF, the JEDs, the enterprise zones that we need in the city that we don't have?
No, I really think what they utilize now is good. I'd like to see, obviously more of them, because I want to see more sustainable jobs and businesses coming out, and you have to be competitive with other markets. You have, Bellefontaine, Plain City, these areas that have room for development. You want to make sure that you're competitive with those and you don't lose them out. So I think they're utilized pretty well. I'd like to see maybe a couple more of them pop up.
Any in particular?
No, I mean, I think the one moving towards the one with Jerome Township is a great idea. I think continuing to look at partnerships, with Plain City. People forget about Plain City sometimes, I think, and it's a tough situation because they're half in Union, half in Madison County. They're one of the halvesies, but I think looking at some type of partnership with that. Of course, always want to see TIFs come through. Cooks Point, if that's a possibility, that would be a good one as that starts to develop and build up.
Great. The city council, of course, controls the budget. Do you think there's wasteful spending going on in the city right now?
I think, Tom, to be honest with you, I think the city does a pretty good job of managing the budget. I think there's always rooms to move things around. I think, infrastructure is always a big thing. It's something I hear a lot about from people I've been talking to over the last couple of months. And as I'm walking and driving through Ward 1, some of these roads are now getting upwards of 20 years old, and you're getting beyond the point, I think, where you can just put a little tar and fill a pothole and be done with it, where you have to look, in how do we repair these roads, how do we repair the infrastructure, the curbs, what do we do to pave some of the streets, and what do we have to pull from there. I don't think there's a lot of wasteful spending. I attend a lot of council meetings, and I've seen several of the city budgets over the past few years, and they do a fairly decent job. You can always tighten the belts a little bit and find different things and different ways to spend money, but I wouldn't say that there's a ton of wasteful spending in Marysville.
Do you feel it's important for people who are running for city council to attend city council meetings?
I do, not just for people running for city council, but as many people who aren't that are just residents of Marysville. Number one, it keeps you informed of things that are going on in the city. It helps you understand what's happening in the city, things that are developing and coming down the pipeline from that ground level. And I think it's important to understand the processes of city councils. You have to understand, there's the Pledge of Allegiance, then the invocation. As weird as it sounds, there's almost unassigned seating at City Council, so you kind of know when somebody's missing and who's sitting where. You have to know kind of the rhythm and the flow, and more importantly, it gives you the opportunity to meet some of the players in the city administration. They're all very friendly. The council members as well are all very friendly. When they see you, come a couple of times, they come over, they say hi, they get to know you. You get a chance to talk to them, you get a chance to meet them a little bit. And that's something, in my opinion, city officials should do, especially in a smaller community like Marysville. Know the people that are there. So, but it gives you a chance to learn what's going on, how to operate, how the city operates. I can tell you, odd months, the council goes last, even months the council, then the administration goes last. And you can pick up some of those experiences by going to the design review board meetings, by going to the Board of Zoning Appeal meetings, some of the different committee meetings. You can learn about the processes of the city government by doing that, and I do feel it is important.
They're all run very similarly.
Very similar, yes.
They have an
Yes.
agenda and.
Yep, Board of Zoning Appeals, I can tell from the years I've been on that, there's been conversation of, hey, we're talking about starting to do this with this board and this board to make it more in line of how city council operates. So there's a consistency factor.
Yeah, and
You've been to several of them, I'm
I've
sure.
been to a lot.
I have as well, so I've been to multiple of them.
one last thing, has there been something that you haven't been asked yet that you think it's important? Things that a constituent has brought up to you that we haven't asked or anybody else haven't asked?
Well, there's a couple of questions that I've been asked. One was a while back, and it was a gentleman who had concern about the increasing number of rental properties throughout the ward and what the city can do about that. And he had a pretty good idea. We had a really good dialogue about it. That's discussed, is there something the city can do to help control the rental properties? I don't know legally if there is or not, but it was a great dialogue. He had suggested for every, so many owner-occupant homes, can there be X number of rental properties allowed? Once again, I told the gentleman, I like the way it sounded on paper. I don't know legally if the city could restrict that. Of course, you get into free enterprise markets and things like that could come into play. And the other thing was actually something on social media last night, that geared more towards city officials and thoughts on mental health care and things like that. And, one of the things that I responded was, you have a great mental health recovery board of Union County that does a lot of great programming, and they do a really great job of securing funds that are more than just taxpayer dollars. A lot of grant funding comes through that. And I think, it's important for city officials and county officials and school officials and a board like the Mental Health and Recovery Board to collaborate and partner together to continue to educate, break down stigma, telltale signs, warning signs, how to tell if someone's depressed, things like that. Those are all things that really everybody in the community, not just city officials, could learn. And that was a question that popped up last night. I said, man, that's a really great question. So other than that, I think I've been asked just about every question I could think of, and probably some I couldn't think of, Tom. So.
Well, that's it for us. Thank you very much for being with us this morning. That's Scott Zwizinski. He is running for the first Ward Council seat in Marysville City Council. I'm Tom Stevens with the Union County Daily Digital. Bam. Good afternoon. This is Tom Stevens with the Union County Daily Digital. As a part of our series with local candidates, we are here today with Joshua Bokar, who is running for the Marysville City Council in the first ward seat. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
I will just jump right into it here. Do you feel our zoning code book right now that the city of Marysville has is too long?
I don't think it's too long. I think it's poorly organized and hard to navigate. I recently sat at the last planning review board where they reviewed the new planning and zoning code scheduled to come out beginning of next year. That is more user-friendly, more interactive, and it includes pictures as well. So again, I don't think it's too long. It's just poorly organized and it's hard to navigate.
Are there any codes that you would modify or cut that are in them right now? And if you, no, that's okay.
No, not at this time.
Okay. Are there any, do you add that you think the book needs updated as far as that goes with a different kind of code?
No, I don't see any need for additional codes that we have now.
Okay. Do you feel that we, because of the code enforcement that they have here, have we gained or lost any business because of the code's enforcement?
Due to codes enforcement?
Yeah.
No. No, I don't believe we lost any businesses. I've talked with local business owners who've come. My chiropractor is one of them. He found more roadblocks at the county level than at the city level. Working with the city team, no issues with coming in and moving and setting up business here in Marysville.
Oh, okay, great. With all of the economic development that's going on in the city uses a lot of incentives to help the city and help the businesses like the TIFs, JEDs, CRAs, the enterprise zones. Can you tell us a little bit about what each of those are and what are do they help or hurt businesses as far as that goes?
Yeah, so the most I'm familiar with is the CRA, the Community Reinvestment Area, and there's two in the city. One that was just approved along Industrial Parkway, stretching out to the southern bound of the city, and those are tax abatements. I do find it interesting that the city can tax abate property tax, but that's a power we have, and it's a tool that we use in conjunction with the county for that. All of these tax abatements have to be approved by council, and I would never approve any for any type of apartment complex because property tax is what goes to our schools. So I would never want to take money from them. But it's great for manufacturing. Depending on the type of company that wants to move in, we can implement a tax abatement for up to 100% up to 10 years.
Yeah, that's a very attractive for companies, is that right?
Yes, that helps us keep us competitive in the Central Ohio region.
What are the difference between some of the programs?
So that's still something that I'm educating myself on, to be honest with you. I'm kind of familiar with the TIF, and the JED is definitely a new one. I read about it with what we have with Jerome Township. Like I said, the most I am familiar with is the CRA at this time.
Okay. City Council, of course, controls the budget for Marysville. Do you think there's any wasteful spending going on right now?
Wasteful spending, no. I do think that there needs to be a hard look at the budget and make sure it aligns with the strategic planning that we have set forth. Most specifically, we have $300,000 in next year's budget dedicated to upgrades to the customer service counter, and no one can really tell me why. But there's a need for 3 more EMS service people in the city. That would cost $177,000. In the last month, there was 33 calls that went unsupported by Marysville Fire Department because they were already on a call, and had to be responded to by a surrounding community. And when a surrounding community responds, it's an average of 13-minute response time. So do I think there's wasteful spending? No, but we definitely need to take a hard look and make sure we're funding the programs that we need.
That leads right into our next question is there a place that you would cut funding or increase funding on one of the departments or one of the any of the departments or within the city?
So I would allocate more funds to our engineering department. I think with the new growth that we do expect, they're understaffed right now. They are asking for another engineer to come on board. It was discussed last week at the personnel budget request during the finance meeting to inspect our water lines, sewer lines, and then also free up other staff members who are currently doing this job to work with new businesses who want to come here to Marysville.
So that's one of the departments that you would recommend or you would look into increased funding to?
Yes.
Okay. And the last one here, and this we feel that's an important one too. Do you feel it's important that candidates like yourself be involved in the government before they're elected? Go to city council meetings, planning commission meetings, zoning board meetings. Is that important?
Absolutely. You need to prepare for the job, right? And it also shows that you're willing to do the job without being compensated for it. So I've spent this last year, I first interviewed when this position was vacant after Tracy Richardson was elected to the Ohio House of Representatives. I did not get the nomination of Scott Brock. I think it was a good choice by City Council at the time. So I spent the time to do the homework, to do the research, to attend City Council meetings. I think I've attended all but 2 or 3, and that was due to military training that I was out for. And then I've also spent time going to the Finance Committee meetings, Parks and Recreation. I've gone to Design Review Board to see how all the different committees shape how our city grows in the future.
Is there anything, last question, I kind of fibbed a little bit. Is there anything that has not been brought up in one of the questions that have been asked to you anytime during the campaign?
So, couple of things, 2 things I want to note on. The YMCA deal that was almost proposed to the city earlier this year, I also was in opposition of the city purchasing the YMCA for a couple of different reasons. One, that's not what the citizens want. When the Parks and Restoration Survey went out in 2016 and published in 2017, the citizens said they wanted a new community recreation center separate from the YMCA. They don't want the YMCA. Second, the building is too small, and it was obviously the budget was mismanaged, and they were only going to give us 25% of representation on their board of the YMCA. So I was completely against that deal from the start, and I made that known to council during the council meeting on March 11th of earlier this year. So, so one thing again is there was talk at a work session meeting in March that the city would hire a consulting firm to look into what a new community recreation center would cost. But nothing has happened since then. I brought up the question last Monday night's finance committee meeting to the members and asked if they are going to hire a consulting firm to look into the cost of that, and nothing has been actioned on that. So it's something the city say they wanted over 2 years ago, and there has been no action by city administration or council on that.
Okay, that does it for us. Thank you very much for your time this afternoon. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
We've been here with Joshua Bokar, who is running for the Marysville City Council, the 1st Ward. My name is Tom Stevens with the Union County Daily Digital. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. My name is Tom Stevens with the Union County Daily Digital. Today we are here with Mr. Aaron Carpenter, who is running for the 1st Ward seat for the Marysville City Council. Thank you very much for having us.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Stevens and Mr. Piper. It's my honor to be here with you today. I really appreciate what the Union County Daily Digital is doing for providing fair news for Marysville residents. I really just support what you're doing, and I just really appreciate the chance to educate the voters that I'm seeking to represent on the most important issues that affect them. So thank you very much.
That being said, let's just hop right into the questions. Right now, do you feel our zoning code book is too long for the city of Marysville?
I do. And I've actually talked with thousands of people in the last 6 or 7 months. Launched the campaign back in February, and I've got to meet a lot of people, thousands of people. Knocked on every door in the entire ward, and a lot of them are small business owners, and they've shared with me their experiences of struggling to start a business and getting certain things approved and working through the process. Do I think the zoning code book is too long? I've looked at the city code. Most people haven't. It's over 600 pages long. There's over 30 pages of sign regulations. And I think one of the biggest problems in the city is that our city code is just too highly regulated, which has prevented lots of businesses from coming into town. That's unfortunate. So do I think the city code is too long, or the zoning code is too long? Yes. What can we do about it? Well, when I get elected, I'd really like the opportunity to sit down with the council and discuss with them, create a list, if you will, and say, hey guys, lady and gentlemen, are we able to create a list of all companies that have almost moved to Marysville? Are we able to see the companies that struggled to move here? Are we able to see the companies that decided not to move here because of a regulation in our city code? And if we can create this list, I'd like to take a look at the list and discuss with city council to say, hey, did they not come to Marysville because of this line in the city code? And if we can correlate the reason that they didn't move to Marysville because of this regulation, I would like to discuss with our council to either revise the regulation or just delete it completely so that we can not have that problem in the future. Talk about, I don't know if we're going to be discussing growth at all, but I think that is one thing that we can do as a city, is certainly to take a look at our city code and deregulate it, to remove or at least revise any and all regulations that have provided or that have prevented business opportunities in the city of Marysville. I'm 100% for small business owners. I think it's so important. I'm 100% for the local businesses that are here. A lot of them which endured the 2008 recession. They're doing great still. They're still around. And also new businesses in town. Talk about Texas Roadhouse that just cleared a recent hurdle. I read about it in your paper. A lot of people are really excited about that, and they think it could be a catalyst for the things to come in the next 5 to 10 years. Marysville will inevitably continue to grow in the next 5 to 10 years, and I'm really excited to be a part of that. In terms of the zoning code, I think deregulation is important. I'm pro-business, and I would do whatever it takes to be pro-business, to bring in new businesses to this city in the next 5 to 10 years, while also supporting the local businesses that we already have.
Are there specific codes in the book right now that you would cut?
So I don't know the numbers, and I haven't read all 600 pages of the city code, But I do know that a lot of sign regulations have prevented companies from coming into the city. I also know one of my best friends, he works at CrossFit 184 downtown. The people who worked there, they had a gravel parking lot for a very long time. The city told CrossFit 184 that they were not allowed to start their business unless they paved their parking lot. Now, it's confusing to me, and this is just an example, because at a CrossFit gym, you don't really go there to find a nice parking spot. You go there to work out. And I talked with the people that work there, I won't mention any names, and they told me that they had their ducks all in a row, they had their finances set, they were ready to start business, but the city wouldn't let them because their parking lot wasn't paved. So I don't know what regulation number that correlates to, but to me, it seems unfair that we can't allow a business to do business in the city of Marysville because their parking lot isn't paved. This is one example. Now, I don't know the specific number, but I'd like to talk with council and see if we can prevent this from happening again.
You say that it's prevented businesses from coming in. Do you know any specific businesses that didn't come into Marysville because of the codes?
Sure, so I hear OPAZ, I hear Sonic, just to name a couple. I've heard sign regulations, and so in the city of Marysville, your sign has to be X feet tall. It has to be X by X or X by Y, dimensions. It has to have a certain square area of the sign. It has to face a certain direction. It has to be a certain color. Your building has to look a certain way. And Sonic is unique in its shape. And from the conversations I've had with the voters, they didn't come to Marysville because of our highly regulated city code. So those are two quick examples I can think of that I hear a lot. And I think a lot of people really would love to have Sonic in Marysville. It's iconic. You got the drive-in, you got the hamburgers, the milkshakes, and it's unfortunate. So I'm all for deregulation.
Is Marysville's code book comparable in size to other cities of similar size? We always use Delaware or perhaps Mill Fountain, which is a lot bigger than Mill Fountain. But is the code book in line with those other cities?
I actually have not looked into the other cities' code too much, so I'm actually not as familiar with that. But I do know, based on the conversations that I've had with the residents in Ward 1, that our city code has prevented business opportunities in this town, and people would like to see us revise our city code so that we can make that process a lot easier, and I'm all for doing that. I would support that.
This is kind of a follow-up, and you kind of already answered this one, but we want to make sure we asked. Do you feel we've gained or lost business because of the current code enforcement? And you kind of already said that, but if you expand on that just a little bit.
Do I feel that we've lost opportunities because of the current enforcement?
Yes.
Absolutely. Going back on what I was saying earlier, 600 pages long, 30 pages of which are on regulations about signs. I mean, can you imagine if I handed you a 30-page book and it was just on sign regulations? I mean, it just seems extensive. It seems cumbersome, and I think there's a lot of red tape in this town, which has prevented a lot of opportunities for businesses to come here. So I would, when I get elected, I would love the opportunity to take a look at the city code and see what we can do from a city point of view, from a council point of view, to actually revise and delete some of these regulations that have prevented business. So that's what I plan on doing, and I really hope to work with the council in doing that.
Okay, let's switch gears here. In today's, with all the economic developments happening in the city and the council uses lots of incentives such as the TIF, the JEDs, the CETA, enterprise zones, and so on. What are the differences between these programs, and how are they helping or how are they hurting the city?
Economic development?
Yes.
In terms of economic development?
As far as like the programs used, like the TIF, the CETA, the enterprise zones, JEDs, all those.
So I'm actually not familiar with those zones, but I can and will. I would love to talk to you about economic development and some of the things that I see that we should be doing in terms of bringing more businesses into the city.
Okay, like how?
Sure. So economic development, we talked about deregulation. I think that's a big one, and we already discussed that. I actually spoke with the Daily Digital earlier this year about property tax abatements, which I think is a great idea. And I will have to speak with our city finance director on precise numbers, but I think that's achievable, and that's certainly possible of arriving at a certain number. But the idea would be, we have to recognize a problem. What's the problem? There's been a lot of businesses, number one, that didn't move here because of our regulations. Number two, it's kind of hard to it is really hard to start up a business in Marysville. Number one, because of an expensive startup cost, and number two, it's just working with city government to get everything approved is just not an easy process. So talk about the issue of property tax abatements. What is it? It's basically a property tax credit. So if you have a building uptown, it's empty, a business has expressed its interest in moving there, what can the city do to make that process easier? So the goal is to make it 100% easier for new business owners and entrepreneurs and startups to move to Marysville. What we could do, so your businesses uptown, they're paying a certain property tax. For all new business owners who have told me specifically, Aaron, it's too expensive to start, it's so hard to start, there's so many regulations, it's so expensive, we can offer you a property tax credit for the first year that you're at that building. I don't know the percent. I'll have to, like I said, I'll have to discuss with our finance director in terms of what we're able to do. But the idea would be to offer a property tax credit the first year they move into the building and steadily reduce this credit over time, probably 2 to 3 years. And so just for example, we give you a 30% tax credit the first year you are at that building. Next year, it's reduced to 20%. Next year, it's reduced to 10%, and then after 4 years, your business is paying the same amount of taxes as everywhere else in town. By that time, your business will have grown, your clientele will be more expansive, and the idea is to help small business owners start up in Marysville and to help entrepreneurs succeed in this town.
Don't they already have a lot of these things in place, those with the TIF and the JEDs and the CETAs and stuff, like the city that is? Don't
Sure.
they already have a lot of this stuff in place?
Sure, and I'm not familiar with those terms that you're using, honestly, but I do know that that's something that I would support in terms of property tax abatements.
Okay. The city council, as you know, controls the budget for the city of Marysville. Do you think right now that the city of Marysville is, do they have wasteful spending in the city or in the budget?
Absolutely. I can tell you right now, one of the biggest issues affecting Ward 1, and I have knocked on every single door in this entire district at least once. I'm on my second circulation of this neighborhood. I started back in April. I've knocked on every door, like I said. The people who weren't home the first time, I'm reaching them now, and I plan on finishing that second trip next week. Over 3,000 homes. I've spent over 300 hours out in this neighborhood. I've spent over 50 hours in conversations alone on their doorsteps. In terms of wasteful spending, the number one issue I talk with people when I go to their house is this issue of the YMCA bailout. I talk about it all the time. This is not the first time, and just to educate you, this is not the first time City Council has been faced with funding the YMCA with taxpayer dollars. Ward 1 voters are frustrated with this issue. I learned about this issue. I became very well educated on the issue back in February when the whole conversation began. I attended the open house. I kept an open mind. That's what I'm supposed to do as someone who's running for office, is to keep an open mind and consider all the options that are on the table. I don't think bailout of the YMCA is the option we should be jumping to. Like I said, I went to the open house in February. I asked them, what would the $4 million be spent on? Would it be benefiting the city of Marysville, and how? And they said, well, thanks for the question. And they showed me their billboard that had a list of all the things that the $4 million would be spent on. And it was things like repaving their parking lot, updating the sidewalks out front of the building, updating the facade, which is the front of the building, new tiles in their locker rooms, new foam on the upper half of the basketball courts, a new HVAC unit, air conditioning unit. And I just happened to wonder, how is this going to be benefiting the majority of people living in the city of Marysville? You talk about wasteful spending. This is $4 million out of our city budget. This seems wasteful to the vast majority, and I mean almost every house that I talk to. I will be a no vote when I get elected. City Council has tabled this issue until after the election, likely because they really don't want to take a hard stance either way on it before the election, which is unfortunate. This is a no-brainer for me. Government's responsibility is not to step in and solve these kinds of problems. I cannot think of a single time in American history that has ever worked. I'm not a member of the YMCA. I asked the YMCA how many people living in Marysville are actually a member, and it's about 10%. So it raises the question, why should the burden of bailing out the YMCA and funding their renovations fall on the Marysville taxpayer? I don't think it should. It shouldn't. Why should we be funding things that they should be funding on their own as a privately owned business? I'm really passionate about this issue because sometimes I think we just spend money on things just to spend money on them. And this is $4 million. It's a lot of money, and I think people deserve to know the facts. So I will vote no. wasteful spending, we have to get a control on it. And I think this is a first step. This is like the biggest issue that has to do with that. And I plan on voting no.
The YMCA hasn't been funded yet by the city, though. Is there anything in the city budget right now that you would cut, that you'd say was wasteful?
I think we're doing a pretty good job right now. I think this issue of the YMCA bailout is what most Ward 1 voters are hearing about. I think we're really happy as a city with the direction where we're going with bringing in new businesses right now. So I think right now there's nothing currently that I'm aware of, but I just hear about the YMCA issue, and that's really what I'm focused on right now, because we're going to have to deal with it after the election.
So there's no areas right now that you would be in favor of cutting to any departments or any specific departments right now?
No, not at this time.
Okay. Last one. I know we're about done. Do you think it's important for candidates and people like yourself to participate, go down and visit the city council and the planning commissions and the BZAs while running for election or for running for office? Absolutely.
I've attended many city council meetings this year. I've also attended their private meetings. I've been to a lot of city events. And yes, it is absolutely important to understand how things are going before ultimately being elected. But I think the most important thing about running for office is the people. Getting along with city council is important, but learning the interests of the people and what affects them in these families is ultimately what makes a good politician. I mean, it's such an old school idea to get out there and knock on the door of every home in your entire district. I mean, there's hardly anyone in this country that actually makes the effort in doing that, including our elected officials in Marysville. So yes, it's absolutely important to understand what they're doing and getting in the know of what's going on. But to me, the most important thing is getting to know the people, and I have absolutely done that in the last 6 and 7 months, and I've really enjoyed it. It's been one of the most enjoyable parts of my life, and I look forward to representing these folks in the many years to come.
I know I fibbed a little bit, but I always do this one last question. Is there something that's not been brought up either by the media or something that you're interested in about the upcoming election? Is there something that, again, that's just not been mentioned maybe by your constituents, but we haven't asked or anybody else hasn't?
Yes. I don't know how long you'll give me on this question, but there's a lot of things that...
How about giving us one?
Sure. One, I'd like to talk about the issue of a tax credit. It's probably the single greatest issue that's affecting Ward 1. Marysville, the city of Marysville, used to give you a 1% tax credit on your income every year. I would venture to say that around 2/3 of all the homes in this district, based on the conversations that I've had, have at least one person living in the house that works outside of the city. Whether it's Columbus or Dublin, Hilliard, Worthington, you name it. If you work outside of the city, you're paying double taxes. And it's frustrating to the vast majority of people in this neighborhood because they've lived here, most of them, or a lot of them, have lived here when they received that 1% tax credit. Back in 2009 is when City Council got rid of the tax credit. So 10 years ago, Marysville residents were paying 1% income tax, had a 1% tax credit, and then in the 10 years since then, it's frustrating to people, number one, because there hasn't been a city council member that has fought to bring it back. I'm going to fight to bring back the tax credit, first of all. Number two, the income tax has increased from 1% to 1.5% in the last 10 years. Property taxes are on the rise, from what I'm hearing. Most people that I talk to can attest to that. They're paying higher property taxes now than they were in 2009. And there's also thousands of more people that live in the city than there were 10 years ago. So it's really not hard to see that the city of Marysville has a lot more revenue coming into the town than we did 10 years ago. I think it's time that we have the conversation, and I think we owe the residents action on this, to reinstate a tax credit in the city of Marysville. I would fight to bring it happen. I would be a yes vote to make it happen. I just think, we talked about wasteful spending earlier, $4 million going to the YMCA. I think instead of that, we should have more conversations on how we can give back to the taxpayers. In the long term, it's a cliche thing to say, but the long-term goal is to ultimately bring jobs to the city of Marysville. High-paying jobs, STEM jobs. I'm an engineer for Honda. There's Scott's. we have a whole portion of land called Innovation Parkway. I think Marysville has done a great job of making itself known as a city that brings in, STEM jobs. There's a lot of engineering jobs in the city. So I'd like to continue that. We also have a STEM high school. I think it's awesome. It wasn't available when I was in high school, but I would have loved to get my associate's degree in engineering in high school. So bring in jobs in the long term, reinstate the tax credit in Marysville. We certainly have the funds to do it. I would love to make it happen, and I can promise the voters of Ward 1 that I will fight to make it happen, and I will fight to make a reality the things that I have talked to you on your doorsteps. Most of the people watching this video, if you live in Ward 1, have met me personally, and it's good to see you again. But I can tell you right now, I will fight for you. I'm 100% for the people, and you will be hard-pressed to find another person who will fight harder to make his platform a reality than myself. It's been an honor to get to know you. Thank you for this time today. I really appreciate it, and I look forward to working with City Council and the voters, the residents, working together to make Marysville great. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Carpenter, for your invitation and have us over. We appreciate it very much. We've been here with Aaron Carpenter, who's running for the 1st Ward Council seat for Marysville City Council. My name is Tom Stevens with the Union County Daily Digital. Good morning. Good morning. This is Tom from the Union County Daily Digital. Over the course of the past week, we've had occasion to speak to both of the candidates for Marysville City Council 4th Ward seat. That'd be Donald Berger and Nevin Taylor. We offer their video responses to our questions here on our website at unioncountyDailyDigital.com. We do this in the hopes that you'll be better informed when you go to the ballot box on November 5th. Thank you. Good morning. My name's Tom Stevens with the Union County Daily Digital. We are here today with Nevin Taylor, who is the 4th Ward City Councilman in Marysville. He's the incumbent, and he'll be running for re-election on the November 5th ballot. Good morning, Mr. Taylor.
Good morning. Thanks for coming to City Hall. It's a good thing that I can take a break from my budget process.
Thank you for having us. Just a couple questions quickly. Do you feel our current zoning code book is too long?
I wouldn't say it's too long, but then I wouldn't say it's too short because it needs to be a working document. You can't just put it away because there's too many things that happen with zoning. Every day there's something new that comes up that we have to readdress. It has to be an in and out process. You just can't lay it up and say it's there. But by the same token, it needs to be simple enough that if you come in as a business, you can grab it and say, okay, this is what I need to do, such as the steakhouse had to do going before BZA.
Are there any specific ones that you would cut or modify right now?
I can't say there's one I would cut or modify. The one thing I do want to do is I want to see it become an easier working document for the person that's John Q. Public. Right now, you've got to have a little background. You've got to have the know-how of where to fish your way through the system, sometimes to get the answer that's as simple as oh, I just need to do this, or I just need to do that. Or before I can submit to planning, I've got to do this. I think we need a shortened process where maybe even it's a one-page checkoff list. This is what I need to do. 1, 2, 3.
Okay, I see. Is the size of the code book in Marysville, is it comparable to other cities of similar size?
Our current code book, which you can find online as well, is probably a little more thorough, but that's because we've learned from our mistakes in the past and said, hey, we need to address this ahead of time. We need to be prepared for the what ifs and the unknowns that we don't have. So to say it's too short, no. To say it's too long, no. Is it the same size as people around us? I haven't really studied theirs. I'm more concerned about what ours is and what our citizens and our future businesses need.
Okay. Do you, has the current code enforcement, have we gained or lost business because of the code enforcement?
I would be honest with you and say this. There's probably some businesses that looked at and thought this is way too stringent or this is way too long a process. There are several that looked at and said, you know what, this is a little more thorough. I wish I'd have known this when I had my franchise business in, and I won't say what city, but they're coming to Marysville. So it's good, it's a working tool. We've probably lost some business, but we've learned from those and we're trying to move forward to make it easier for any future business. Let's face it, we're going to see development on 31. We're going to see development on 38. We've got development on 36 on both sides. So Yeah, it needs to be a better tool, and if we don't address that or we shy away from it, then we might fall into mistakes of the past.
Anything specific that you'd like to see in the code?
Not right off the top of my head, there's not something in there. The one thing I would like to see is that it's easier to read. But
Yeah.
that's just as I look at citizens, sometimes they're like, what does this mean? And it should be simplified enough, but yet it needs to be thorough enough that they know what they have to do so they don't have to back up and say, well, I wish I'd known it was this, or I wish I'd known it was that.
I see. With all the development going on in the city and of course in the county, we use a lot of incentives, Marysville uses a lot of incentives to help fund the city, like TIFs, JEDs, CRA, enterprise zones. What are the differences between these programs? What are these programs?
Okay, first off, you got a lot of terms in there, and the one you don't have thrown in there is Turk. But basically, a TIF is a way for the city and a developer to get a process in. There are two different types of TIFs. You've got commercial and you got residential. Residential TIFs always cost your community because houses and homes don't always pay the same tax revenue base income as a commercial TIF. Example, look at all the money that you're seeing being made at Coleman's. There'll be money made at Cook's property. There'll be money made as you go out Industrial Parkway at the Innovation Park. Those TIFs provide more money for the schools, more money for the different county programs, more money to the county, and they get what we need in the ground, the sewer, the water, the roadways. They help us to move forward to better serve. Commercial TIFs definitely are better as a whole for all the entities, and I imagine you'll see some TIFing that will happen down along the COG 33 process. But there again, if you're not willing to invest some and say, hey, you don't have to have all that money up front, you can pay it over a period of time, then you just stopped development. Think about what will happen, what kind of development will come in. If you're looking at a JED or a CEDA, which is CEDA, those two programs are to say to you, example, Mill Creek, I want to work with you as the city of Marysville. Here's what we need to work out ahead of time so we know what's going on. So I don't bring something that you aren't comfortable with. It's a good neighbor policy. JEDs help to develop joint economic development district, meaning both entities that are affected work together. It's important that as we look at going south, we need to JED process. We need to have it. And they aren't created in a one step. The current JED we're working on is a 2-year process, but it's finally getting closed. And Jerome and Marysville, like Mill Creek and Marysville, have a great working partnership. Let's face it, we're next door neighbors to each other and we have to do it. Dublin is coming north, we know that, but the more we can JED, CEDA, get processes in the way that we can look at, hey, as a whole, what's best for all of us, what protects my citizens, what protects your citizens, and I say mine being Marysville. No. It's not Nevin Taylor's, because none of the JEDs, none of the TIFs, none of that's done by one person. And there are several spots where the public can intervene and ask questions. That's the beauty of it. Now you talk about, and I mentioned the word Turk, and you kind of looked at me, that's tax incentive review. And what that is a county-wide process. So we have North Union schools, we have Marysville schools, we have Fairbanks schools that all sit on a board. We look at businesses that say, hey, I would like to have a tax break for 10 years or a 5-year. Here's what I'll bring you in income. Here's how many jobs I will bring you. Here's how many capital investments I will bring. The Turk is a process that's reviewed every year by the committee, including headed up by the county auditor, where we look at a business and says, I promised you 10 jobs and $1 million. Okay, I'm at $1.1 million, but I've only got 8 jobs. And there is a committee, we sit back and take a review and say, okay, we'll give these folks a break because A, they've got the income above, they haven't got the jobs, but there's going to come a point in time, especially because they're talking about adding on to their current building, that those jobs may go past 10. All good things that happen in a community take some bending, some talking, not behind the door deals. These are all out in front. Everyone can see them. They can grab them online. They can look at them. They can look at the promises. I mean, let's face it. We have some great companies that's benefited from this. Example would be Honda. Tell me that wasn't a good investment. Scott's. Tell me that wasn't a good investment. What's going on currently in our community is not as simple. Walk up, walk into a meeting, and make it happen. Those programs all work for a whole. You just can't make a pumpkin pie with just pumpkin. You got to have all the blends and the mixing. So when you talk about those terms, they're out there, they're online, people can see them. I think the most important thing is that all of those programs have to move us forward and make sure that we answer that new development helps take care of the costs new development brings.
We'll hop into the new one. We talked about the enterprise zones and so on, and what the difference is and how they help. That's what was going to be my next question.
Okay.
That you answered that. The city council, the Marysville City Council, controls the city budget. Do you think there's any wasteful spending in the city right now?
In my opinion, no, because if there is, that's because I didn't do my job. Since I seat myself as chairman of the finance committee, it's our job with Hank Burpee and Mark Reams to review the budget completely, put together any questions we have, and to also provide opportunity. Example, like there's 8 positions being requested by different departments. We have to analyze the cost of those individuals, and there'll be ones that need added later. There's no question in my mind that with the city growth, police and fire are going to need more help. Currently, we're a dispatcher under what we need, and the current ones are getting worked a little too hard, too much pressure. Being a dispatcher is a lot of pressure to start with. So to say there's wasteful spending, no. To say there's some things in there that I will move to curtail the amounts, yes. And there'll be some that I'll give on to the other council members to make sure that we as a whole understand. Not any one of the 7 council members that's seated here understand every line 100% and can answer questions on it. But I will guarantee you that all 7 of them will research, get their answers, and be prepared to speak to the public, whether it's at the farmer's market or whether it's an Uptown Friday night. And I can promise you that all 7 of us said more than once, I don't know that answer, but I will get that answer and get back to you. Example is that the 6:30 call this morning, somebody wanted to know why their brush wasn't picked up, and they want to know why we put so much money in the brush department or the waste. And my comment to them is, I need to make a call. I made a call, got back to them and said, your area was picked up Tuesday, but we're going to try to help you and make an exception and get there before Friday. So some people might say, well, you got too much money in the waste department. No, we need that flexibility. So when we look at budget next year, we have to look for the what ifs. To say it's wasteful, if there's something in there that's wasteful, then Nevin Taylor didn't do his job. But I can guarantee you I've looked at it a lot. In fact, I was looking at it this morning when I was at an appointment with my wife. So the budget's a long process. We start back in June analyzing what we've got for the first 6 months, and then every quarter we review, and now we'll propose it at next Monday night's meeting, the official, where it's public online and people can look and ask questions. And there are lots of citizens who will say, well, why are we paying this much for this? Or why are you putting money out for a conference line? And then if we can't explain it, then it shouldn't be there.
Do you think it's important that candidates who are running for council, they should be at the council meetings, at the BZA meetings, at the planning commission meetings?
I think it's important that anyone who wants to sit behind this counter, who wants to wear that title as councilman, should be at all the council meetings. I can tell you, if I'm beat in November, you're still going to see me here in February, because Marysville's home and citizens need to be aware. And if individuals want to speak for our citizens, then they need to be where the meeting's taking place. I think it's important that the citizens get to see more than just paper. I think it's important they get to see more than just signs. I think it's important that tonight at the particular Meet the Candidates, that citizens get a chance to say, hey, what about this? And let them ask their questions. Because a lot of times when you're sitting behind this counter, you don't get the luxury of preparing for 2 weeks. There are some things that you have to have your homework with, but there are sometimes you ask a question that it's going to be your research. I can guarantee you that the 7 people that sat across here never walk into a city council meeting. If it's going to last 2 hours, you can bet they put 6 hours into preparing for it, because they want to know the legislation, they want to know the cause and effect, they want to be accountable for their decisions. And many times you've heard me say, or someone from the citizens have heard me say, I'm not comfortable with that vote, because A, I don't see the direct benefit, or I think there are more costs than what's being presented to us. So I think it's important that as you look at attending, Your preparation prior to is important, but your face needs to be important. You can't be afraid of being able to say to someone, I don't have that answer, but I will get that answer. And 24 hours is plenty of time. There's no reason not to be back to any citizen without being able to get the right answer and 24 hours later giving it back to them and see if they've got a follow-up question.
That's what I wanted to follow up with, and this is going to be our last question here.
That's fine.
I know you've had a lot of questions since we've started. Has there been a question that a constituent of yours or voter has asked you that we've not asked you and you would like to address here?
Yeah, I'm going to be very honest with you. The low-income housing and the governmental funding housing, I had a little trouble with that question, and for two reasons. Number one, those two types of housing, I want them to be able to be next door and no one be able to tell it's that type of house. I don't want a district where those folks that need our support and help have their house singled out as, that's a government project. They have character just like you and I. They need to be treated exactly the same. So that's one of the questions I was, I don't know if I like my answer I wrote to you guys for your survey that you presented me, but it's something when I've talked to a couple of other councilmen, are like, yeah, we need to get a little more accountability and responsibility for a solid answer. But do I ever want to see those two types of housing pointed out where someone that lives there has to hang their head? No, because they're a Marysville citizen. I'm a Marysville citizen. We both call this home. It's important that everyone understands they all get the same treatment. I don't care if you're $1 million income or if you're still working on food stamps and trying to get by just to take care of the kids and make sure they got shoes on. You are Marysville. You are a citizen, and this is home. So, yeah, that stirred with me. And since then, I've talked to a few other entities and who are public officials, and one of them happens to be up in the governor's office, and he said, you know what, I wouldn't have had a good answer for that. I wouldn't have, he said, because I don't think I would know what to say exactly. So, is it an area we need to be concerned about? Yes. But you know what? More importantly, there needs to be concern that it's Marysville. It looks great everywhere, regardless what it is. And I don't care if it's a house trailer or $1 million mansion. It needs to have the same character to say this is home. Because integrity means, more importantly, making the right decision even if nobody's watching. So if I have to make a decision on low-income housing or government-funded programs, I want to do it with the same decision as I have of let's build a new development. You know, instead of the promise of this is going to look great, how about we all look great? I mean, that's my answer. That was a question that troubled me, and it was nice to see one of the governor's staff had the exact same response when we were at a committee meeting.
Mr. Taylor, we want to thank you for being here this morning. Thank you very much. I'm Tom Stevens with the Union County Daily Digital. Thank you for watching. Good afternoon. My name's Tom Stevens with the Union County Daily Digital, and today we're here with Donald Berger, who's running for the Marysville 4th Ward Councilman seat on November 5th. Good afternoon, and thanks for being here.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me.
Okay, we're just going to jump right into it here.
Okay.
We have several questions we want to run through. First, do you feel our zoning code book is too long right now?
I think anytime with government, I think that people sometimes, when they feel that government's not working for them, they get frustrated because they think it's, zoning is not working for them or something. But I think as of right now, you're seeing homes being demolished for auto parts stores. So I do not think our code is too long. I think there's a lot of the code needs to be cleaned up and modernized, especially as the town grows. People are going to want to see more out of our zoning code. So as of right now, I don't think the zoning code is too long, but there's a lot of the code that needs to be modernized and cleaned up because a lot of the code is outdated compared to most communities around us.
That leads right into our next questions. Are there any specific codes right now that you would cut or modify or add right now to the existing code?
So I think one of the biggest things, obviously if you're following my campaign, I really want to build on community. I want to build on making Marysville, and so many people say, well, I want the small town feel and I don't want to lose what we brought us to Marysville. So we have to think to ourselves as a community, as residents, and we have to say, what actually do we like about Marysville? And we have to come to the table and really think about what we like about Marysville, and then based on those facts, then we have to preserve what that is. And it's going to have to take zoning code to make that happen. So one of the things that I really advocate for is, one of them, just an example, is the sunshine laws. And sunshine laws is when government has a meeting or something, they have to put it in the newspaper. Well, right now, they by code only has to put it in the newspaper. And that's why I'm running the campaign, because the majority of residents don't realize when things are happening with development, and they go on Facebook and they act confused. So one of the things that I want to do is put in code that city has to start putting signs out 30 days in advance to let people know what's going on in the community. Because by code, they don't have to do that. They don't have to put it on social media. So, putting it in code that says the city is obligated to get residents involved, I think is a huge issue that I want to campaign on.
Another lead in
Yeah.
to that one, because we were asked to. Is the Marysville Code Book, is it comparable to size in other similar sized or same size cities?
Well, I think it's so, as a city planner, it's really hard in my opinion, it's really hard for Marysville to say that we're compatible to other communities, because cities are quickly evolving and they're quickly growing, and technology is quickly growing. So zoning codes are always changing, and just because something has been written either 5 days ago or 50 years ago doesn't mean that zoning can't be changed. The issue is when a code is written, sometimes it's forgotten about, and then it collects dust, and it takes a resident to say, well, wait a minute, that's not right, for council or government to dig up those codes and reread them and say, well, we probably can modernize them. So for me, it's really hard as a city planner to ever say, well, is Marysville comparable? Because, if you look at Dublin, for an instance, Dublin, their code is very lengthy and it's very detailed. And same with Worthington and Westerville and a lot of other communities. Marysville code, even though it touches on a broad scope of things, it's not as detailed and doesn't have a lot of teeth like many other codes do.
So is the current code enforcement, has that caused the city to gain or lose any businesses?
I think, again, your code is always, the way codes are written, the way zoning is written, is your council creates a vision for your community. And then when they create a vision for your community, then your code will be adopted based on that vision. So is Marysville losing businesses or gaining businesses? I don't really know if that's the truth. Like some residents will say, well, Panera didn't come here for a long time because our zoning code. Marysville is still a very young and growing community. Even though we're 200 years old, Marysville's seen a lot of growth in the last 20 years. As Marysville grows and more money is put into the community based on people living here, you're going to see the diversity of restaurants and shopping malls and things like that change because the town's growing. So for a business to locate in your community, they all have marketing directors. So it's all about marketing. So let's say if an auto parts store wanted to move here, they're moving here because of the economics of your community. It's the same way if you go to Dublin, and I'm using that example because we can relate to Dublin, but there's restaurants in Dublin that Marysville doesn't have. And there's restaurants that Marysville has that Dublin doesn't have, because it's all based on economics of your community. And I think that is sometimes what residents sometimes might not understand. But that's why, residents vote on people like me for city council, because I have the degree and the knowledge, and you hope that the representation you have on council is doing everything they can to benefit the town as a whole.
Okay.
So,
We're going to shift gears completely now.
okay.
We're off the codes, so we're going in. With all the economic development that's been happening in the county and in the city in the last 20 years, the city uses a lot of funds, a lot of different programs, TIF, JEDS, CETA, enterprise zones. What's the difference between these zones and how these benefited or hurt the city?
well, so that's a loaded question. The tax incentives are all different based on what businesses are locating in those tax incentives. So, but the issue that I was trying to get at is we, as the community of Marysville, we are the ones paying the taxes to give to these businesses for them to locate here. And sometimes, they are, they cannot pay taxes for 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 30 years. It's whatever the economic team at the time chooses for the business and get them to come here. So one of the things that, as a city planner, with a lot of small towns is that the tax base is becoming tighter and tighter. Your dollar bill at home is not stretching as far. So, the issue is that, and I'm just going to use an example, Marysville will give a tax incentive to a fast food restaurant. That fast food restaurant will pay that money back. And the mindset has always been, well, you get the money back when they hire employees, they pay a minimum wage, they build a nice building. But the problem is what that mindset is, it's not keeping up with technology. The taxes in this country, when it comes to tax incentives in a lot of smaller towns, have not changed. And so we're giving these tax breaks to businesses to move here, but they're not hiring the amount of people to pay the money back sometimes. Or the employees that they're hiring are not making enough of a wage for the city of Marysville to collect the benefit from their income. And I think that is what big cities are succeeding at doing. You see all the time in big cities, like Columbus just gave a tax incentive to build a new hotel. And the city council said, okay, well, if we're going to give you these tax incentives, you have to pay all your workers a flat rate. You have to do this and this and this to improve the community for you to get this. So I think those are the ideas and the questions that we have to start talking about as a community, because when that new business comes, you as a taxpayer, not only are you giving that business a tax break, but you have to pay then to clean the streets, pave the streets, planting the street trees, maintaining the street trees, fire, police, and all that money adds up. So, so with me being a city planner, those are the things that I have to really think about and say, okay, if we're giving this business this much money in taxes, then what are they giving back to us?
Fair enough. Yeah. I'm sorry. City Council, of course, controls the city budget. Is there wasteful spending going on in the Marysville City Council budget right now?
When it comes to city budgets and when it comes to government, everybody, and I do it too, we all pick and choose what we believe money should be spent on and money we should not be spending money on. But I think when everyone doesn't like government until something is taken away from them, and then they get upset by it. And it's either removing that firefighter because we can't pay, the health care costs for them, or removing a police officer, or removing a city worker, or not paving the streets, or maintaining your city. I think as of right now, if residents are frustrated with the budget process and if they think that money is being spent negatively, then I think, the opportunity for them to come to meetings and voice their concerns and asking for the printout of the budget so they can read it, I think that to me is a question that's up to individuals. I think that the one thing that upsets me about those city budgets is that we spend a lot of money on making master plans. And I'll use the historical district as the example. You know, since 1970s, the city has been pumping millions of dollars into the historical district to create all these master plans, but as a resident, you've never really seen huge amounts of improvement in the historical district. Yes, you know, we got new businesses, we have a new park, we have a new city hall, but you can go to Troy, Ohio, Bellefontaine, downtown Columbus, you can go to all these very vibrant downtowns, and Marysville's downtown, we can make that happen. It's just the master plans tell the city of Marysville what they need to do day by day, year by year, to make our downtown, our uptown, just as successful as everybody else's. We have to become a community that looks at those projects and say, okay, let's do this, and let's put and make it into a categorized issue and say, this is what we can do this year. This is what he can do this year. So I guess out of the budget, that is the one thing that I do get upset by when we have the master parks plan, when we have all these master plans, because everyone loves to say we did all these master plans, but when push comes to shove, a lot of the master plans just sit on a shelf and then nothing really gets done.
So that's what you would say they're probably wasting money at this point?
I wouldn't say they're wasting money, because what the city hall is doing is any resident can go on those pages and see, well, this is what you paid to do, so why aren't you doing it? So to me, it's not wasting money. I think it's the stepping stone. It just takes leadership and people running for council to say, you know, Marysville, you're spending all this money on these master plans. Now let's start electing leaders who are going to actually execute these master plans. And I think that's the difference with council that's on there now, and then maybe hopefully as the years continue, electing new members to council over time.
You kind of touched on this earlier, and again, this is shifting gears, and I'll let you off the hook. This is the last question.
Okay.
Do you think candidates running for city office like council should be participating, going to the council meetings, going to the planning commissions and stuff like that prior to the election?
I have always been very community minded. You know, as some of you know, I went to my first council meeting when I was 12 years old. I'm the first and I'm the youngest planning commission member to ever serve for the city of Marysville. I got my degree in regional city planning. I have created an historical driving tour. I have created events to clean up the waterways in uptown. I have volunteered hundreds of hours pruning the trees in the cemetery and, you know, doing all kinds of community projects. Not everyone's like me, and I get that. I'm very community minded. So for me, I always tell people, if you want to run for public office, get involved and, you know, go to boards, go to commissions. A lot of people go to city council meetings, or they participate in the public sector a year before they want to run for city council. And I respect them from doing that, because I rather somebody know the operations to be able to run for office. But at the same time, for me, I want to see somebody really dedicate time and effort and energy into it before they run for office. Because anybody can run for office, and anybody can say, you know, you have all these great ideas to change your community, but unless you've really dedicated the time and actually have done things to actually try to change, you know, you don't know the process of how things are going to change, you know. And a lot of people run and they say, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this. Well, you have to remember, you are one out of other 6 people. And you can run a campaign and say, you know, I'm the leader, I'm going to do these things, but at the end of the day, you have to get total 100% of support of the council, because you might not never be able to get some of the stuff you want done, because you have 6 other minds you have to agree with. So for me, if you want to run for office, yes, getting involved as quickly and as you want to. And if it's that a year or whatever, that's fine. But I always say the more time and effort you put in your community, the more people will realize your passion for the community.
Thank you very much for your time this afternoon. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
But this has been Donald Berger, who's running for 4th Marysville City Council in the 4th Ward. My name is Tom Stevens with the Union County Daily Digital. Good afternoon.